the blessing over study, and then we'll jump into Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for providing us texts with which we gain insight into our lives. Amen. Okay, so there was a quick question, so let's just review about whether Ecclesiastes, the name of our book, is a Greek word. Jonathan, will you help us just give us context,
Yes.
insight into the naming of the book?
When there is such a thing called the Septuagint, which is a translation of the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, and so the New Testament is written primarily in what language? Greek. The Old Testament, Hebrew Bible is written, I just gave you a hint, is written primarily in what language? Hebrew. There's a tiny bit of Aramaic in there as well. So when, what language did Jesus speak? Aramaic. What the heck is Aramaic? It's kind of like Hebrew. It's in that same family tree. But it was, for all practical purposes, the lingua franca, not quite English, but in that area, that was the language everybody could communicate in. You remember perhaps the story of Jesus after he was crucified. What languages did Pontius Pilate have put up on the cross for everybody to see? Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Those three languages, so all the Roman Empire, anybody who knew Greek, another major language people would have known, and then Hebrew for Jesus' own people, he's communicating as far as possible. Septuagint was a translation of the Old Testament into Greek that more people knew. Not that many people knew Hebrew unless you're Jewish. Many, many people knew Greek, so it's a way to provide access. It'd be like translating something that's in a relatively obscure language into English so more people could read it. That's the basic idea. Ecclesiastes is a Greek term. Have you ever heard the word ecclesiastical? We're referring to church. So it's church is basically what that means. Or technically it means the assembly or the people called out. And so Kohelet, sometimes translated as preacher, other times teacher, is from the assembly or the leader of the assembly, which is roughly akin to the priest or the rector.
The congregation.
The congregation would be the assembly. Yeah, assembly or congregation would be interchangeable in that regard. Yeah. Is that good?
There are often congregations, Jewish congregations, that in their charter, their incorporation, the name of the congregation, maybe we had to have a dog when I was growing up, that with his papers with the AKC, the American Kennel Company, Corporation? Club, that's what, the C is club, American Kennel Club, had a very fancy name with lots of different things, right? But we called him Rover, right? And in much the same way.
We had one.
Yeah.
My dog's name, does anybody happen to know, other than my wife, the official registered pedigree name of Misha? St. Michael the Archangel, patron of all Calvary. That is the name on his official AKC papers. Which is our patron saint, but we call it Misha, which is Russian or Ukrainian for Mike.
Right. The Beatles sang it that her name was McGill, her friends called her Lil, and everyone knew her as Nancy. Right? So, okay. So the names of these books, the incorporated names of Jewish congregations are often Kahal Kodesh, Kahal as in Kohelet, Kahal Kodesh, which means the holy congregation, and then Road of Shalom, B'nai Israel, Beth Shalom, right? That kind of thing. So Kahal is the word today in Hebrew, which means congregation or assembly. And so Kohelet is the one who convenes or the one who speaks to the group. That's the idea, right? The wise one, the sage on the stage is often the way in which one a clergy or pastoral personality is expressed. The sage on the stage is, right? So that's Kohelet. So the wise one in the front of the room who's professing what a smart person would appreciate. Yeah?
Much like you right now.
In this very moment.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
And they came from the desert? Where'd they come from?
Where did the Hebrew people come from? So we go back and look at Genesis and talk about where Abraham came from and who his people were and whether that was geographic or what it meant. But the Hebrew people, or the Ivrim in Genesis, were from that essential region. For our purposes, from this far away, they were from the desert.
Let me ask a very I'm not a Jew question. What is the difference, and when were they called this Hebrews, Israelites, Jews? Is it all kind of the same thing?
Kind of the same thing. So I had a professor in rabbinical school who referred to the Hij, Hebrews, Israelites, Jews, which meant this people of whom we're speaking, though it may be anachronistic to refer to anyone who we would look back and think of as the first Jew, to call them a Jew, that term didn't exist for that people. They were Hebrews, or later they were Israelites, and later they became Jews by nomenclature in terms of what the referent was, right? Someone asked me today, it's worth saying because they were reading in the news, they were hearing a lot about Judea and Samaria and terrorists in Judea and Samaria. And I was explaining to them just this morning that Judea and Samaria is synonymous with the West Bank of Israel, but it's the ancient term for that land. And today, it suggests a bit more muscularity in referring to that land. The Trump administration is referring to it as Judea and Samaria. It has historical and theological overtones, what you call someone. In the same way as someone who calls you by the nickname you had as a child, well, they knew you back then, right? It suggests something about how you know one another if they knew your nickname or they knew your maiden name, that kind of thing. And you might use it for a particular purpose to suggest something with regard to that individual, right? So how we refer to something, we're talking about this, whether it's the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, the nomenclature suggests something. It wasn't always called the Gulf of Mexico. I don't know when that moniker came into vogue, but that body of water had other names based on who was referencing it, right? We could appreciate that. And in the same way as referring to this book as Kohelet or Ecclesiastes, or referring to that piece of land as the West Bank, which is a geographic term that was based on how the land was carved up after the Ottomans by the British. The West Bank refers to the bank west of the Jordan River. It's a geographic term. Judea and Samaria is more historical or theological term. But it's important to know what we're referencing and why we might choose to refer to this land, this person, for that matter, refer to God based on different terminology. We'll suggest something, and we'll know something about someone. In the same way, to make it just more prosaic, whether you refer to a carbonated beverage, if you're from Atlanta like I am, you refer to it as a Coke, even if it's Sprite. Someone else says it's a pop or it's a soda, or right? So we learn something about, right? Anything else just about nomenclature.
What type of Coke you want, Aaron?
Sprite, right? That's how it works in Atlanta, right? Okay. Yep. All right, so we're going to do this a little bit differently perhaps than we have in the past. Let's take as our text, you have the chapter 7 in front of you. I've selected with the second handout. Do you have the second handout also? Yeah. To look at three particular verses. We can use the whole text to inform our questions as well as our answers, but I thought we'd look at the very first verse in chapter 7 to get us started, and then to begin to unpack it. So the first verse says, "A good name is better than precious oils, perfume, anointing oil," however that's translated, "and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth." So let's see what this is doing. In biblical criticism, we look at part A of the verse and part B of the verse. So looking at part A, we're talking about what we mean by a good name and how that's better than what it's being compared to, in this case, that which we adorn ourselves with, right? Someone want to just help us understand that A part of the verse, just on what we call the pashat, the surface level. Oh, yeah. What does the A part of 7:1 suggest? A good name is better than oil, perfume. What does it mean? What does it mean to you when you read it? your first impression. Yes?
Reputation is better than anything else.
Reputation is better than anything else. Anything material, anything you can acquire, anything that you can put on yourself to give you a greater sense of, I don't know, that you smell good, that you look good, that you are something, are attractive. The artist, Judy Chicago, once said that one is never as revealed, or naked, I think is the phrase she uses, one is never as naked as when they're fully dressed for a party. That is to say, we're showing ourselves when we drape ourselves in that which we want people to know something about us. Maybe one doth try too hard, or protest too much. That a good name, however, your reputation, is the highest of achievements. We'll look at what that means a little bit. You can jump in at any time. That's how Torah study works.
You mentioned we're doing a Torah study. Will you remind everyone?
Yeah?
Do you know what he's doing right now? Obviously, he's teaching about Ecclesiastes. Is it exactly how I teach? No. What are you doing with us?
I'm trying to encourage or invite you to feel, to roll up your sleeves and get messy with the text, as it were, to engage with the text, the ideas.
I'm sorry, it's so obvious you're not thinking of it. That this is how a rabbi would lead a Torah, a Bible study. And there's a surface level and all these different levels, and to draw us in so we can draw out the meaning of the text at the obvious surface, literal level, all the way to the spiritual type of thing.
So let me give you on one foot, which means that's the Jewish idiom for in a nutshell, right? On one foot, I'll explain. There's a tradition that with regard to engaging in a Torah text, which is to say any text, but in particular a text that comes from the Bible, that there are 4 levels. And the idea is each one has an initial. Peshat means just the surface level, the way a child reads a story, right? The characters are in the story, there are things that are happening, nouns and verbs. And for a simpleton or an innocent or the uninitiated, it just works on the surface level. You may not appreciate that something more is going on. You gain a little bit of insight, a little bit of experience, and the next level is remez, which is a hint. There's something going on. There's a talking snake in this story about this man and woman in a garden. That's unusual. We might pique our interest or engage our curiosity a bit. There's something else going on if there's a talking snake. Or if we're comparing reputation to oil. That's not a contrast or a comparison we make very often. There must be something more to it than something saying, this is of more value than this. Different than saying, this item costs more in the store than does this item. It's not simply comparison shopping. There's something else going on. The next level is drosh, which we get the word midrash, where we gain a deeper insight. There may be a connection going on. There's a lesson here. There's something to teach us beyond the hint that something's going on. There is, in fact, something that we can make a connection to, and the insights that you have as you sit here are in that category. And the final is sod, which is the word for secret. There's an understanding that, or a humility that we carry with us that suggests there's a level that will elude us. There's a level that isn't available to us, or we may only get a flash of insight about, and so we should be careful about feeling that we've overdetermined or solved for the text. And if you take these 4 words, Peshat, Remez, Drosh, and Sod, and take the first letter, the acronym, you get Pei, Resh, Daled, Samech, Pardes, which is the word we use for paradise. In Hebrew, it means orchard. And the idea was that you take this text and you wander through an orchard, and there's all kinds of things to discover in an orchard. That's the idea. But it's really to give you permission and license to work with the text and share your insights, as opposed to believing that the rabbi has all the answers or that there's a definitive way in which this text is necessarily understood. Is that fair? Okay. So let's talk about what it means to have a good name. What does Jewish tradition understand about what that is to have a good name and why it's so precious? So let's just take a look. I put a little notes in here. In Jewish tradition, a Shem Tov, or a good name, is considered one of life's most enduring legacies. The Mishnah is the earliest part of the Talmud, which is the legal compilation that grew out of the Torah. The Torah says things like, with an economy of language, be fruitful and multiply. The Talmud is the first code of legal material that begins to discuss what does that mean to be fruitful and multiply. Not the birds and the bees per se, but with whom, when is that completed? All of the conversations in our political sphere or in our religious sphere that deal with reproduction, reproductive rights, reproductive ethics, technology, all of those conversations in our culture derive ultimately from this command to be fruitful and multiply, and then determining also how do you go about doing that? What's going to be permitted? What's going to be permissible? What are we going to legislate? How are we going to regulate those matters? They derive from this basic injunction. And if your understanding of those issues are informed at all by your religious tradition, you can thank this process of understanding what the Torah means or what Genesis means, in this case when it says be fruitful and multiply. Another place it says observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And from that we get all kinds of things about how we regulate a work week or whether or not you can sell cars in Pennsylvania on Sunday. Right? Does that make sense? That's how this works. And the Mishnah is the first compendium of these conversations. So it's the earliest post-Torah or rabbinic legislation or body of legislation. So here's what the Mishnah has to say about a good name. There are three crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship. But the crown of a good name surpasses them all. Now, if we were to build this sermon and use the classic technique of rhetoric where we rely on 3 points, the classic sermon or the classic political speech to be effective relies on 3 points, and there are different ways to build that. You can have 1, 2, 3, and then draw a conclusion by connecting those dots. You can have thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You can do all kinds of different things with rhetoric, but it's built on 3 ideas. So if we talk about there are 3 crowns, the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, the crown of kingship, but the crown of a good name surpasses them all, what might we be saying? Yeah, please.
This is all very interesting to me, because when I hear good name, I always think, who's looking at that and deciding that?
When you hear, I want to just repeat for everyone, when you hear the phrase that someone has a good name, you wonder by whose assessment or who says.
Because I've heard, different things about my own father's name.
You've heard different things about a given individual, you're referencing your father, but a given individual, and you're not so sure that one person's assessment of this individual is itself accurate. Yes? Am I hearing you correctly? So what in point of fact is a good name, or who says? All right, so let's hold that for a moment, right? That's an important question. By whose lights, right? Is someone good, or is their name worthy of being lifted up, or whether it should grace an airport, or whether it should grace a monument, or whether you should be proud of your name, or whether the sins of the fathers carries on to the next generation or beyond, right? These are the questions your question gets to. All right, what might be, if we were to build a sermon, what might be the crown of Torah, the crown of kingship, a priesthood, and the crown of kingship? So what if we said, I'm making this up, but I don't think it's too far, but it relies on your help. The crown of Torah would be the crown of scholarship. And we can appreciate, you think about people you know about or people in the neighborhood, those persons who are recognized for their scholarship. However you want to understand that. For their accomplishments academically, intellectually, perhaps professionally. Right? They know what they're doing. They know they're expert in that. And so we turn to them for certain things and we appreciate them for that. And what might the crown of priesthood or the crown of kingship be? To be a priest or a king, right? But what does that suggest? How do they differ? You're writing a sermon. It's not a definitive answer here. If you were to distinguish, to be a teacher or a ruler. To be a teacher versus a ruler, right? To deal in the political or the military or the powerful realm versus the spiritual realm or the moral realm Or, right, we're just playing with that, with ideas of trying to distinguish what these three might be. So this person is recognized for being a scholar, and so we're going to give this person an award for being really good at that. And we're going to recognize someone else with the Nobel Peace Prize, if that still has moral value, because they've accomplished something in this realm, right? And we're going to honor them for that, for their pacifism, perhaps, or for their moral courage, perhaps, or being heroic in a certain way that seems to be beyond the everyday experience of most of us, perhaps. And then a king crownship of kingship, that could just be political power, military, I don't know, another realm. But the idea of a good name is greater than any of those. What does it suggest? Yeah?
But a good name is relative to the culture in which that person
Fair enough.
is.
Fair enough.
So maybe if I'm a counterculture and I don't like that culture, that's none of her good. I'll kill you.
Right, okay, right. So you don't have to accept this, right? That this is the definitive definition. That this is the definitive way in which we understand the world. This is Ecclesiastes in the first verse of chapter 7, suggesting something, yes?
What I hear right now is that if there's if you have a place in any of those three, or you have a seat in any of those three, and there's a conflict of interest or principles, that you shouldn't choose to not to protect the good honor of your name, as opposed to prioritizing numbers.
That's very nice. So everyone hear that? No, I didn't think so. And then I'll get you. The suggestion was, see if I get this right, that if you're working within any of those first three realms, the realm of Torah, of study, of scholarship, the realm of priesthood, or the realm of kingship, should there be a conflict within that, you should, if you're part of that conflict, err on the side of doing that which will preserve your good name. So we think of the person who on principle resigns. This has been true in the last couple of weeks, but we can go back earlier in history, so it's not about the political moment, right? Let's not make it about the political moment. But it's that we know that sometimes someone resigns on principle, and we think that's a really admirable thing. I may or may not agree with what they chose to do, but I respect the fact that rather than compromise themselves for the purpose of moving up within this kingdom, this realm, academia, military, politics, whatever it may be, they've chosen to do the honorable thing, to preserve their name, right? We hold that up. Okay, good. Yes?
So I'd like to take a look at the precious ointment, because humans tend to put a lot into what ointment or what we therefore decide is really great, like in terms of stuff, right? And this is saying that your name is, you can't associate the name with the stuff, and the removal of like the ointment from the name.
So we're making a you're clarifying for us or sharpening the distinction between preserving one's name over and above anything else you might acquire.
So even if you have the great stuff, the precious ointment, you can't just say that they have a good name because they're associated with the precious ointment.
So, good. So think about how in our society currently, of the moment, who we regard, think about American sociology today, who we regard as a society as, I don't know, virtuous or emblematic or admirable, or you'd want your children to grow up to be like. Who in our society possesses the qualities, or what are those qualities that we believe mark you as holding the crown of whatever it may be, right? And is it about amassing the most X, Y, or Z? Or is it about perfecting one's character? Or is it about being true and loyal to a given something, such that in that on that scale or in that metric you've measured up or you've achieved something? These are open questions. Ecclesiastes, one of the core books of our wisdom tradition from the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, suggests that prioritizing a good name over and above amassing wealth or amassing power or knowing the most things, a good name is more precious than any of them. Okay? Thoughts? Yes. Jonathan.
You tell one how I've experienced this. Thinking about Kohelet, which I've been spending a lot of time with the last couple months now, what does he say his metaphor, all life, all striving, achieving is what? Vanity, chasing after the wind, havalim, vapor of vapors. He keeps hitting that point. You know what? Most of this stuff is not worth it. What if you, thinking about specifically Ecclesiastes and what he said, so the three crowns, so say you're, without naming any individuals, at the height of your field, you're the richest, you're the best whatever football player or singer. What could happen to you if you say the wrong thing? Get canceled? What happens if you make bad investments in the stock market? All your money's gone. You can lose every single one of these things. And part of his contention, I think, is, and I experienced this personally not too terribly long ago, where I was accused of lots of things, and it was an attempt to destroy my name. What's another word for name in this sense? Your reputation. And it very much, I would say, I experienced it as, somebody said, do you think this person's trying to take away your livelihood? Yes, I absolutely do. And career, and these other things. All that could be stripped away. And something I learned a very long time ago is, people can take from you my job, my life savings, the future. No one can take away your integrity. You have to give that away. That's just the way it works. And to me, name means that. It's not a perfect thing, of course, or perfect comparison, but you have to give that away by your actions. No one may know who you are with your reputation or name, but still, people around you would know that guy is the best plumber in the world, or this is the one of the best rabbis I've ever known, of the 3 or 4 I've ever known, you're among the very best. That reputation, in some sense, is who we are. Again, according to Kohelet, does it translate exactly to today? To a great degree, it does, because we can still lose all that power. There's something interesting about I just had a birthday a few days ago. There was a time when I was, let's say, 30, when there was like 100 churches just, oh my God, we'd love to interview you now. And then you hit this point where you're no longer young, but you're a good friend of mine who happens to be a rabbi, and I were walking around Pitt's campus. He said, Jonathan, do you notice all these 18 to 22-year-olds don't even realize we exist? And I, of course, said, speak for yourself, Aaron. But that's true. We're old. We do not exist. And the older we get, the more it seems that is the case. Certainly in commercials, you only see older people unless it's for particular products they're advertising. If you're trying to show off our cool car or beer, it's not old people enjoying it. It's young, good-looking, fancy-free type people. We lose all those things. Everything can be taken away from us, but not that. Not integrity, not your name. I think that's what, at least for me, that's what Kohelet, the writer of Ecclesiastes, is trying to do. It's reinforcing a point that is surprisingly contemporary in that sense. But is your good name going to get you into heaven, going to get you a big reward, according to Kohelet? No. But at least you'll be remembered. Is that fair?
Yeah.
That will endure to some degree. That's not the Christian message, but that I think is reasonable to Kohelet. So just my opinion on that.
Excellent. So thoughts about, we're moving on, but thought about that A part of the verse, about what Ecclesiastes is sharing, what a Kohelet is teaching us with regards to the significance of a good name in contradistinction to anything else you might choose to value or anything else that might draw your attention or, right, that might seduce you to pursue that rather than being a person of integrity or conscience or, right? Okay, how about the B part of the verse? The back page of this. That the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. This is really, for a Jewish reader, a counterintuitive notion, because the idea in Judaism is that prioritizing life is above all the virtue, the value. And there's a reference here on the second line in the parentheses there. Pikuach nefesh is a phrase that references saving a soul or saving a life and is used as shorthand, that phrase pikuach nefesh, because Talmudically we're instructed to understand that with rarest of exceptions, any commandment can be violated for the purpose of saving a life. And so if you're, the most prosaic perhaps, if you're commanded, as we are, on Yom Kippur to fast, and yet your medical health, your physical health requires you to eat or to take medicine or to do what you, then that's what you do. And if, as we are, commanded to do no work on the Sabbath, but if saving a life, driving someone to the hospital, requires violating the Sabbath, then you're commanded to violate the Sabbath for the purpose of pikuach nefesh, preserving a life.
Do you remember when this happens in the Gospels with Jesus healing people on the Sabbath? You, naughty boy, you shouldn't do that. He said, do you remember what Jesus said? If your horse or your animal fell into a pond or into a ravine, you'd pick him out, wouldn't you? And yet you want me to let this person suffer or die, and I can't violate the commandment to help a person, you would do it to help an animal?
Excellent.
So it's the same idea.
And remember that Jesus' ministry, and then in the years in which the disciples are writing the Gospels, this is completely contemporaneous with the period in which the Mishnah, the earliest Talmudic literature, is being compiled. So they're arguing, maybe for the same purpose, not with each other necessarily, but with the idea about to what are the limits of the law, essentially. If realpolitik or real life demands something of you, and we have a commandment from this text that tells us this is disallowed, so what do we do in those situations? Like any other legal dispute, we have conflicting injunctions or arguments. Charles?
Is there thought given here to the fact that a good name is something that one earns through a lifetime?
Yes.
It's not
The-
something
Do you
that's
repeat
given
that?
immediately at birth.
Correct. Charles has pointed out that is there something about the fact that a good name is something that's earned consistently over time, as opposed to something that's conferred upon you or granted to you, right? Now, there may be that in our family, understand our name is a good name, and you have an obligation, son or daughter, to live up to the family name. And yet, to be ascribed as someone, or to be described as someone who has a good name, not just you're born into a good family, but that you have a good name is something, as you suggest, that we have to earn over time consistently. And if you do that, you'll have a good name. Whereas with Jonathan's example, as we well know, you can be quite industrious and very consistent with making investments every pay period. And in that way, you'll build a nest egg. But it can be wiped out through no fault of your own. Yes, we appreciate that. Whereas a good name in contradistinction.
Yes, what was Calvary's, and I am relying on you to speak for all Jews for just a moment.
Yeah, I'll be ready.
What was Calvary's reputation amongst the Jewish community in Pittsburgh 10 years ago? Fine.
Right.
Fine.
Friendly.
Friendly. What would it be now?
Way up. Right? Say something.
Hold on a second. Start.
I was at a restaurant a couple weeks ago, and I thought I recognized someone from Tree of Life, and I greeted her. And she said, no, I'm not from Tree of Life. And the woman she was having dinner with said, I'm from Tree of Life. And I said, oh, I'm from Calvary. And that conversation brought us both to tears.
That's lovely.
Because-
Everyone hear that story? At a restaurant recently, identified someone she thought was from Tree of Life. She was corrected that the woman's not from Tree of Life, but her dinner companion was from Tree of Life, identified herself as from Calvary, and it made an instant connection and bond, right? And Jonathon, this past week, shared with me that he received a very high compliment. Remember when someone, and that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago.
It touched me as much as anything in the last few weeks, and that is, you may or may not know, Augie, who's Roman Catholic, Augustine, is the sexton or building maintenance guy for the Tree of Life Synagogue. And because they don't have a building of their own, they go to Road of Shalom. And to help us out and to help Augie just keep working, he's here one day a week at Calvary. By the way, as it turns out, he's as deaf as one of our other sextons. So if you see two guys yelling at each other, they're not fighting, they just don't hear well. Could not be nice for either one of them. Augie's been here for a year, give or take, and something, I guess you could feel this way if your kid said or did something that made you immensely proud. That's what happened to me. So Thursday, I'm coming back from something, and Augie's leaving early. He said, "Bye, Rabbi." I said, "Bye, Augie." Jonathon. And then he laughed and walked out. I was like, I just got promoted, lateral move, demoted, but it was a sign of affection that I'm just like Jeff Myers. I'm that now. And it was, you're one of the team, one of the gang.
So.
That's happened numerous times to Calvary with particularly Tree of Life, but the whole Jewish community.
I want to add to that because what you did went viral, and somebody in Colorado called.
It's what we did, yeah.
I just heard about this, and it's such a wonderful feeling with all the anti-Semitism that's going on, that something good like this happened.
Excellent. So that's how we make our reputation, right? That's how we burnish our credentials, or our, right? By being true to who we are.
Our good name.
Our good name, yes.
I do remember having little kids here, going to Rosh Hashanah,
We did.
stuff together.
Absolutely.
And it was not, so it wasn't brand new to me or anything, that there was a relationship, because there was all
There was always neighborly relationships.
relationship.
Right.
And then there was a mass killing, and so there, other things got added. But it felt like that's the difference?
Yes, but it wasn't a foregone conclusion that after the events of October 27th at Tree of Life, right, that this relationship would blossom in the way. There was absolutely nice relationships, neighborly. We had pulpit exchanges, we had things, right? And so Jonathan's overture on behalf of Calvary, or Calvary's welcoming Tree of Life, or for that matter, welcoming me, is consonant with who Calvary has always been. It wasn't a radical departure from what the tried and true had been, but it was a reinforcement of the values of the good name.
Well, that's why I said, maybe you weren't here, before the relationship amongst the Jewish community, it was fine. But now we are deep friends with a couple congregations, and then it is extremely affectionate just beyond that to larger. That's a fundamental difference. You could know somebody for a while as colleagues or acquaintances, and then suddenly, in our case, it'd be like if you met somebody every once in a while at school to you're in the military in a foxhole together, and you skip all these steps of becoming friends and neighbors. That's what happened there. That's the name, that's the reputation that we're talking about. We do things now. I'm about to be, I said this a couple weeks ago, in the Purim spiel at Tree of Life as Mr. Spock. It's just a completely ridiculous thing because that's what friends do with one another. Would we have been in that before? No. Would Tree of Life people been in a Christmas pageant? That's the craziest of all of them. But because we like each other, you do stuff that you wouldn't ordinarily do, or like, I'm sure they don't agree with everything, nor do I of them, but that's okay when you like and respect each other.
If I can draw this closer to sort of tighten this up, is that the decision to do that, for Calvary to extend itself, or for that matter, when right after Tree of Life, the events for Road of Shalom to extend itself was not grounded in a financial decision. No one asked whether that's good for business, right? Or whether this will strengthen our hand in the interfaith community such that it'll advance some policy goal or something, right? It was the right thing to do. And that doesn't mean that we've done that everyone who prides on doing the right thing always does the right thing or goes out of their way, but it's in keeping with the good name. It's in keeping with the ideals or the central tenets. It feels true to who in this case, the congregation is, or who the individual is. And I would suggest, as we're discussing it, 7.1a, that a good name is greater than anything else you might pursue, is consonant with that idea. Yeah, a little bit more. Michael, and then we'll come around.
Your handout on the day of death was not as good as better than the day of birth.
Yeah.
Quotes the Midrash as the answer. When a person dies, all weep, but if he's led a righteous life.
Right, we're going to get there. Yeah.
Okay, but that seems to be contradicted by verse 14 in chapter 7. God has made the one as well as the other, so that mortals may not find out anything that will come after them, which includes the notion that there's going to be peace after death.
No, it's not about peace after death. It's not, forgive me. So let's look at what Michael's inviting us to look at. The B part of the verse, 7.1b, right? The day of one's death is greater than the day of one's birth. The goal, the understanding is not, or should not be, I want to disabuse you of the idea that this is suggesting that that's because of what awaits one beyond the grave, right? It's not that as you enter the world, you're now in this base material world, but as you pass through the entryway after death, you're now in a better place. That's not the Jewish understanding. At a Jewish funeral, you'll never hear the rabbi say, the deceased is now in a better place. You'll hear that in certain other religious traditions or in other communities, and that's all well and good. But that's not what 7.1b is suggesting. Instead, apropos of the Midrash in the middle of the page, is that where it is? Right, like a sailor watching a ship, when a person is born, all rejoice, but they do not know what will become of him. When a person dies, all weep, but if his righteous life, he's going to peace. It suggests going to peace, but what it's really talking about, and they use the image of a seafaring community, that when a ship sets out on its journey, people are rightly concerned for what the fate will be while they're on the seas. Will they come back safely back into harbor? And so they worry as the boat sets out. And when the boat returns, they know that the danger is completed. They know that there's no reason to worry, and so they rejoice when a ship comes safely back into port. Whereas when a child enters the world, we rejoice, and when someone dies, we lament. And the verse here in Ecclesiastes 7.1 is suggesting that the day of your death, when you complete your earthly rounds, that's the day on which we can take an assessment of your life, and we take greater comfort, solace. We can rejoice in how well you lived, whereas a child coming to the world is going to have a raft of challenges, and you want your heart broken, become a parent. Right? And so why rejoice? Well, because that's the way in which we orient ourselves. We're not a death-focused culture. And that's the idea. And then from there, we can talk about, so what does one need do during their lifetime to merit a good death? Yes?
Some of what you're commenting on makes me think about the morning prayer, the Te Deum Laudamus, which ends with the, O Lord, in thee have I trusted, let me never be confounded. So to die, not having been confounded, truly that's a great thing, especially if that person has been through the many travails of cancer or some awful kind of death. To remain
Yes.
to the end is a powerful thing.
Is a powerful thing. Right? Did everyone catch that? If the goal is to not be confounded, so what is it then to be confounded? Perhaps it's to lose spiritual integrity, or to lapse into doubt, or to nihilism, that ultimately, if everything is vanity, nothing matters, well then why should I invest in anything at all? What does it matter? Maybe it's all a fool's errand for me to expend my energy in this way, or for me to be concerned about anybody else rather than my own pleasure. Eat, drink, and be merry. That's one response, right, to the uncertainty. And there is something about that, right? What can you control in a world of such unpredictability as ours? Well, you can tend to your good name. You can be true. You can be faithful. Right? We can fill in the blanks about what you can control or what you can focus on, lest you fall into despair, or lest you decide that it doesn't matter, it's all futility. Even being faithful is futile, because still you're going to die, or still you're going to suffer before you die. It's short and brutish, right? I mean, all of that is true, and some of this may be summed up, Jonathan, you can jump here anytime. Some of this may be summed up in the next verse, or the next one we look at.
I would say, if you're asking me to jump in, Kohelet has been pretty consistent all throughout. Is life rosy and wonderful and just one, joy or adventure after another? No, life is full of what? Starting with Adam and Eve when they get kicked out of the garden. He uses one word to describe over and over what the human situation is. Is it realizing your potential? It's toil. Toil in the sense of it's hard work, and something he mentions here, verse 15, righteous people seem to get punished sometimes, or bad people don't get punished. Life is fundamentally unfair. Life is fundamentally unjust. And if life is that way, and if it's nothing but hard work and heartbreak, and you can lose all those things that you strive for your whole life, money and maybe even reputation and security, it's better to just have that over with, is another way to look at this. Because if you're being born, oh my God, look what that poor kid's got ahead of him the next 70 or so years. Or rather, this guy, you know what, thank God his suffering is over. Kohelet should not write Hallmark cards, is a very fair thing to say. And it might be, now where I'm from, sometimes I exaggerate when I'm telling a story or in a sermon, but that doesn't mean it's not true, it just makes it a better story. But sometimes Kohelet, I think, being very good at leading us along this argument, will put up this example, which is like, wait, that's not right. It's better to be born than to die, isn't it? Surely, everybody knows that, but he's constantly challenging the common accepted wisdom of the day. So to raise the question or the statement, the idea, it's better to be dead than alive, not advocating suicide, but better that this is your end of life and beginning, it's getting back to his point over and over and over because life is so impossibly difficult and challenging. Allison. Steel has to be tempered. One could say that, Alice is saying that all the disciples, apostles went through a test. You could easily say all of life is a test in that regard, if following that line of thought. That's fair. People get better when they overcome troubles. My internet went out 2 nights ago, and I'm not better after that event. I want to say that. But I feel better because I thought it was an AI bot, and then he claimed, no, I'm a real person, but gave as much of a darn, I'm cleaning it up for the TV, gave as much of a darn or care as an AI bot would to solve my problem. It says, no, it's your router's fault. It's like, it's your router, you own it. I actually understand computers. So after 2 hours of nonsense and being tempted and being tempered, I was very, very angry at Verizon Fios. And so I then spent the next hour fixing it myself, and it worked. And I did feel really self-righteous and like I'd achieved something, but I'm not sure I was better. Sometimes, and this is not Jonathan's argument, this is Kohelet's argument. I'm giving a modern-day example. That happened just like that, by the way, but Kohelet would say, are you better if you go through all this suffering? No. Everybody does. Did you learn something? Who cares? It doesn't matter if you learned anything because life is meaningless. I know you don't agree with that, but am I wrong? If you read it this far, is that what he seems to be saying consistently all throughout? That is not the Christian message at all. But again, I keep trying to get us back to follow his argument to its logical conclusion to the end, and you can accept it or reject it, or that's good, that's not good. But I think that's what he's trying to say.
Right, I think that's right. So let's just look at verse 15, 16, 17.
In 1 minute.
In 1 minute. 15,
So on one foot.
on one foot. 15 kicks us off. But the caution in 16 and 17 is not to believe that you've solved the riddle, as it were. To not believe, it says, where's my glasses? Do not be overly righteous, nor make yourself too wise. Do not be excessively wicked, nor be a fool. And the question that seems obvious, at least to the Jewish reader, or to the rabbinic eye, is this suggest that you can be somewhat righteous or can be somewhat wicked? And the answer...
There you go, Allison.
Right? The answer seems to be that given the futility, again, we're in Ecclesiastes' realm, we're in the realm of Kohelet, where nothing is of significance ultimately, except how you respond to it, given the vicissitudes and the inconsistencies and the unpredictability and the unfairness of human experience. You should not believe that you've solved it. That is to say, don't be overly righteous. There's a wonderful phrase here that's in the middle of the page about being overly righteous. The Hasidic or ultra-Orthodox idiom is a tzaddik in pelts, which means the righteous person who wraps him or herself in the fur coat, keeping themselves warm with their own sense of righteousness, but is not in any way concerned with someone else. There was a journal many years ago, a Jewish journal, that had as its cover story, holier than you or holier than thou. That is to say, you may be more punctilious or ritualistic or observant than the next person over, and in that way you may be holier than the person sitting next to you, but the goal is to avoid being holier than thou, as if you know, based on your behaviors and experiences and beliefs, what's good for somebody else. And we could unpack that a bit. So don't be too smug, or don't be too sure of your own understanding of the world, and then either cut yourself off from everybody else because you've got yours and I'll take care of my own righteousness. You'll be left to fend for yourself, or to believe that you're in some way better than somebody else who doesn't get it at all or who chooses to be deaf to the pleas. And then the second part, the B part of the verse, is not be excessively wicked. That is to say, do not believe, it's on the back of the page, do not believe that because you're incapable of achieving perfect righteousness, that there's no reason whatsoever to attempt to be good. Right? You could convince yourself that because I don't have the ability, not because I'm weak, but because I'm human, I don't have the ability to be perfectly righteous, as if that's the goal, scoring 100 on the test, as opposed to doing your best. Different goals, right? Different ways of measuring whether or not you achieve something that day. You should not believe that because you can't be perfect, that now it doesn't matter what you do whatsoever. And not only is it okay to be fallible, but beyond that, you might as well go have a really good time.
The old Christian expression is, sin boldly, so grace may abound. We gotta go.
Excellent. Yep, we're good.
Thank you all.